Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. We are here with Jonathan from Fun City Editions. Good morning, Jonathan. How are we?
Doing well. Good to meet you, Ryan, and thanks for having me on.
Same to you. We have talked about Fun City Editions countless times. I am always singing the praises of this label, and it is one of the handful of labels that I seem to identify as having an actual identifiable voice. And a lot of
Wow.
labels are a little all over the place. So one of the things that really excites me about Fun City is when it was first announced, and actually, if you go to all of the listings on Vinegar Syndrome right now, it lists that these are for maverick repertory cinema that can best be described as works outside of their time, or sorry, works that exist outside of their time. Can you share what that means with everybody? Do you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, for saying all that. Nobody's. I don't know that anyone's put it exactly like that before. As far as our label having, such a definable voice to use. So
Right.
that's really cool. And still kind of blows my mind that anyone would see that or would get it, so to speak, uh because we're not as easily identifiable as a genre type of label,
Right.
or doing something that's, well, just more definable, because our films, those films that exist outside of their time, I mean, it is a pretty, there, it that doesn't quite tell you what we do, like if we said
Right.
we did horror or something like that. So, but there's obviously plenty of other labels that are doing that and do that well. So really, it kind of, I guess, goes back to the types of films, I think, I that really have excited me, or that I've always been excited to discover, which is films that don't fit into an easy category, that were trouble, that maybe had trouble hooking on with an audience when they first came out, for one reason
Yeah.
or another, maybe because they sort of rest in, more than one place, that people had a hard time maybe making sense of. Like, I mean, like, a good example is, for one of our early, which would be one of our early titles, was I Start Counting, which is, a good example of like a tweener kind of movie, in that
Yeah.
it's partially a thriller, partially a coming of age story. And when you have things like that, where it's like, what is this movie? Is it this or that? When there's tonal shifts, or there are those, or it kind of belongs to multiple categories. That's something that a lot of times people aren't, that, a general wider audience isn't into that. So yeah, so movies that exist outside of their time is just it's just a cute way of saying this movie was a little too weird, or a little too ahead of its time, or a little bit, just too far left field, to be accepted by the widest audience possible. But then, because of that, now, decades later, those a lot of those films are still sort of untapped, or haven't really been released in the way that we're doing them.
Right.
And that's another thing that we, strive to do a lot of times, is release things that haven't been released yet, just because we've seen so many movies that you can double and triple dip on. And it's just more fun to work on something that hasn't been done yet, and that hasn't really had a lot of discussion around it. You
Right.
can kind of make the discussion, make the conversation, and then you're also not. I don't want to be trying to stack up against, something that's, another label that's already done something great for a particular film.
Right.
It's just more fulfilling to do it for something that hasn't had it yet.
And
So yeah.
that's one of the things that's excited me about this is all of these they seem to be able to generate the first round of hype for some of these films. And
Hmm.
I think that the internet age is really going to give things like this that second breath they really need. And I inevitably, when you do something like I do, I get literally probably every single day somebody messaging me, "Hey, I like these few films. What's something I would like?" And
Yeah.
I think back in the day when you were relying on like TV guide excerpts and really quick snippets at the end of a Siskel and Ebert segment, maybe a lot of these you can't explain in 25 words. And now when you can literally be speaking on the internet or gushing to somebody in private message over how one of these just really grabbed onto you, that's when something like this is going to get legs and maybe get a real fan base. And there are certain things, I mean, I wasn't really going to go into individual titles, but like Walking the Edge, it seems to have grabbed on to so many people, and it's got big names in it. So it's one of those things that's like, kind of surprising that it didn't have a huge presence then, but it's got power.
Yeah. They're cult names though. Still,
Right.
everything's relative. Yeah, but yeah. Well, that's a movie that yeah, it for us, that's probably the closest that we've come to a title that was a title that easily you could have seen been a Vinegar Syndrome title or something like
Right.
that. I mean, it is a more straight up genre revenge movie, but at the same time, it does have this really interesting character arc. It
Yeah.
is also ends up being a movie about a guy who's thrown into this situation, but it sort of is what kind of what precipitates his growth,
Right.
his arc, and it's like an arc and an actor and a quality of performance and a quality of I guess writing, character development that you just don't usually see in a movie like that, and that's what people respond to because Bob Forster was like, such an incredible actor and a guy who, of course, at that point he was not in a great, he wasn't he wasn't at the peak of his career in terms
Right.
of success, but he did this part and injected it with a level of quality that you didn't normally see in a quote unquote grindhouse film like that.
Right.
So yeah, that is so yeah, so it still does sort of fall into what I was saying before about these movies being more than one thing at the same time. And it is fulfilling when people do see that, because not everyone does, but I'll read the reviews, say like on a letterbox or something, which I think is a good gauge for seeing the sort of up to the minute audience
Right.
engagement with these films, especially because they're small. The films a lot of these films have such few views before before we release a Blu-ray, so it's
Right.
always interesting just to see the numbers and the ratings sort of go up when the Blu-ray comes out. So anyway, I just use that as walking the edge. When I read a review on there, for instance, where someone does get that, where they're sort of like, yeah, it's a revenge thriller, but really, it's really about this guy, getting off the ground
Yeah.
and kind of getting his shit together, and it's a character. It is sort of in line with a lot of um, the the really great character based stories of the American cinema from the 70s, the
Right.
previous decade, where it was a lot of good, there were a lot of good character stories.
It seems to be one of those titles you can review shortly, but add the like, but also not really because there's so many quirks in it, and at a lot of these they feel that way. I mean,
Yeah,
even something like Jeremy, for the people that really got this early on when it was released from you guys,
yeah.
it didn't seem to have a lot of hype. But then when people started watching it, just watching people's feedback steamroll was such a really cool thing to see. And I don't know if you felt that, but a lot of
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
those groups that I follow, it really happened like that. It was word of mouth caught fire on Jeremy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's probably, I've said it before, but like that was a movie that was maybe the closest to my heart of everything that we've released. It was a movie that I've loved for many, many, many years, and but I always knew that it was kind of like one of those movies that a few people knew about. It was like it was that movie, or one of those movies that the people who know about it love that movie.
Right.
But it was definitely under the radar, and it wasn't at this point. I mean, it was a popular movie when it came out, but it was an example of a movie that wasn't really quote unquote fashionable, in the subsequent years. Like all these other things, even though it's a New York movie, there's so many, so many other movies around it. I felt like
Yeah.
people liked, but this was one of those movies that kind of got left behind. So it was very special just to see that, it's almost 50 years old, but there's a universal quality to it in
Yep.
terms of what the characters are going through, and people that was what was funny to see was there would be like people whose profile I'd see on Letterboxd, and they're like all into like gore and slasher movies, and like really like straight up there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like they're not people you'd think would be into something like Jeremy, and they're like, oh my god, this is about me, or I cried like I never
Right.
cried in a movie before. So yeah, no, that was incredibly fulfilling, and also just because like the actors were, because we had the actors on the disc and had an interview. We had the interviews with the two main
Yeah.
stars. So the fact that they were around to see it, to sort of enjoy the movie and their performances, getting a new look, almost getting treated like, because there's so many people just had never heard of the movie before, and it's like I say, it's almost 50 years old.
Right.
So yeah, just the fact that we had them involved and they were able to kind of get a little taste of that was really cool. I know they really appreciated getting the mentions, like when Quentin talked about them on the Pure Cinema podcast, like stuff like that. I mean that blew me away.
Right.
But yeah, I like shared that with Glynis O'Connor, and she just loved that. Like they're talking about me on on a podcast now 50 years later, and it's Quentin Tarantino. So you can't do much better than that, especially with the audience we're trying to grow. So
One of the things that I've gotten a lot of feedback on lately with a lot of OCN titles, people are appreciating that we are getting a not really a surplus, but more of these smaller labels are picking up that we love booklets. And you've been doing a lot of them since the beginning. And Jeremy
yeah.
is one of the better ones, I think, that it really gives just an additional side to what you can absorb through a product like this. And it's so nice to be able to have, after the movie and you absorb it for a little while, pick that up and then really dive into that and just get an overall like putting a bow on it at the end. I always love doing that, and I just want to say thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome, but thank you also for actually reading the booklet and and appreciating that it's there, or knowing that it's there. Because yeah, I mean, you see like a lot of labels don't do booklets, and
Right.
I definitely had some advising against it early on, or like you don't need to do that. But yeah, I definitely felt, well, that first of all, the Jeremy booklet is the essay was by Bill Ackerman, who's a friend of mine, and he's collaborated with us, I think, a number of times,
Yeah.
or he will be in the future. And he and he's one of the few people who I knew who knew this movie and enjoyed this movie before. So that was a movie that wasn't as easy to find people to do
Right.
supplements for, because it's not a movie where like everyone's like, oh, me, I'll do it. So,
You talked about Jeremy being really close to you. I'm curious, for a lot of people, and I think I know the answer to this, but most people, when they are trying to get into partner labels through Vinegar Syndrome, they don't understand just how small some of these outfits are. So the way this has a unified voice, it seems like this is all Jonathan. Is this entire thing curated by you specifically?
Yeah. Well, I am the one. I'm the one full-time person here. Yeah, it's a one-man band, but I mean, it would be disingenuous for me to say that like I don't do. Obviously, every release has different collaborators, and then there's also, of course, all of my partners at OCN and Vinegar Syndrome who are with me on every release. And but yeah, as far as the curating goes, yes, it's primarily, yeah, it's me. But obviously sometimes I don't know about something and someone might suggest something to me, and then it ends up being something that I'm like, oh yeah, wow, that's great, yeah, we should do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly, for the most part though, yes, it is just a one man show.
That's awesome. And like I said, you can tell it seems every single choice has seemed very personal. And you brought up Vinegar Syndrome. So one of the things that I was going to ask about is you were literally one of the first like OG partner labels. How did that come about for you back then?
Well, it's I've known quite a few of the people over there for years as acquaintances, or half a degree of separation, and
Right.
just uh, a mutual friend and colleague of mine, who's a who has who's done distribution on his own before, and he sort of acts as a broker with studios. And a lot of there are a number of people like that in the industry who are sort of like have relationships with people, various studios, people who represent libraries and stuff like that. So
Right.
a friend of ours, mine and Vinegar Syndrome, who's also just a personal friend, who put together a deal with MGM, and it was something where I had started this label, or I had formed the business. I had the business foundation for the label for several years, and I just hadn't done anything with it yet. And it was just sort of like, hey, would you like to piggyback on this deal, with Vinegar Syndrome? And we just went from there. And it wasn't really at the beginning, it really wasn't a formulated plan to be a
Right.
partner label. That didn't even really exist. I mean, Agfa was around. I don't remember even when they. I don't know if my dealings predated Agfa becoming a partner label, but then by the time these movies started, this deal came together. It was and it was time to release them. It was oh yeah, you're going to be a partner label. So I was just along for the ride. And yes, at the beginning it was Agfa, and it was Fun City Editions, and then from there it's just gotten, it's crazy. Like I totally lost track of how many partner labels there are at this point.
It's pretty
And
crazy.
it's pretty overwhelming. But the funny thing is, like, at the beginning, since there wasn't really this whole um, little cottage industry over there wasn't this whole separate machinery that was established yet. People didn't really There wasn't really the partner label thing. There was Agfa, and there was Vinegar Syndrome, and then their assorted sub labels. So people
Right.
assumed that Fun City was like a new Vinegar Syndrome offshoot, and
Right.
sometimes that's still how we are referred to. I don't think that happens with the other partner labels that came later. Now people don't think, oh, it's all just they're all part of the Vinegar Syndrome. They're all curated by Vinegar. Obviously,
Yeah.
people don't think that now because they're so varied, and they're just doing so many different things. All these different labels. So
And I think a part of that is because a lot of us that do this, we've had to hammer home this is a completely different label and just spell it out for them. And now that I mean, I think the last time I counted, there's like 21 partner labels or
oh,
something.
is that how many? I thought it
It's
was even more.
Yeah,
But
it might be.
yeah, no. But at the beginning, it was funny. It was kind of annoying, but it was funny at the same time because people would say, "Oh, they're not any." They're. It's like they were treat. It was almost like a conspiracy. The conspiracy theories. Oh, it's a new etiquette. It's just the same thing as etiquette. They just changed the name to Fun City Edition. So because we obviously have some things, there is some connective tissue between
Right.
a lot of the stuff that we've done, and what they were doing or trying to do with etiquette.
And already, I mean, you've more than tripled the amount of things they put out over Etiquette, and there's still more coming. You got a title that was just announced for this month. You want to give us some not insider knowledge necessarily, but some feelings on the Coca-Cola Kid?
Yeah, sure. So the Coca-Cola Kid is a good example of a movie that a lot of people of a certain age remember from when it came out, because it actually did have a pretty wide release at the time in 1985. It was a, you know, wasn't a huge success box office wise, but for someone like me that was had HBO and watched a lot of stuff at the time that I don't even remember. I didn't remember until I saw it as an adult that it was an R-rated film, because I just like remember watching it as a kid and I liked it. And I mean, obviously, I'm like, wow, so much of this went right over my head. I don't know, but I remember I liked it. But anyway, my point is, it was a movie that people saw on video and saw
Right.
saw on cable, but then it kind of went away for a while. It did have a DVD about 20 years ago from MGM, and but it's like even though the film is by a recognized auteur, Dusan Makaveyev. It kind of did it is kind of like an outlier movie for him, and that it's sort of like it's a weird movie for most filmmakers, and for him it's a mainstream movie. um and it has Eric Roberts and Greta Scacchi, and but these are actors that their peak years are sort of in the past for the most part.
Right.
Although, of course, Eric Roberts is doing like 800 movies, well, not 800 movies a year, but I think that's what he's up to on IMDb at this point. And he
Jeez.
is, I know he's on Righteous Gemstone, so he's having a moment. But my point is, like, his time as like a leading man was, obviously a long time ago, back
Right.
when Coca-Cola Kid was made. So yeah, and it hadn't come out on Blu-ray. It hadn't been restored. It hadn't been updated for the HD era. So it just seemed like a title that was, and even though the MGM catalog has been so deeply mined by so many boutique labels over the last 10 years or whatever, the Coca-Cola Kid was one of those that somewhat surprisingly had not been. And as I just said before, it it is kind of a weird movie, and I say
Right.
that in a most positive sense, in that it's again a movie that it has a lot of things that sort of on the surface are kind of mainstream. It kind of has a mainstream, kind of a classic screwball kind of setup, but then of course it has so many oddball things injected throughout it that sort of would make people scratch their heads, like, okay, I got all this stuff, but then what the fuck is this? Like,
Right.
like it just sort of like, and that's kind of why it's again a fun movie to do, because it is going to it is going to split people, and it split
Of course.
people back then when it came out too, because it's doing multiple things at once, and it's also it is this is a movie that, even though it has an American star, it was made in Australia. It has a European filmmaker, so it's an international mix of people making this movie, and it's not like, and like I said, it has some Hollywood elements, but then it also has art house elements, and it has some stuff that's sort of very sort of goofy, obvious surface level humor,
Right.
but then it's stuff that's sort of cutting deeper and is more, is sort of on a more, on another level, and and a little, and it's gonna be a little bit, yeah, some people are gonna be like, yeah, pass, and then other people are gonna say this is brilliant. I think it's definitely one of those. There's no middle ground.
I have a Discord community through this channel, and one of the people that is involved in the Discord, he was elated just the fact that we are getting I can never say the director's last name right, Dujan Makayev, is that correct, or pretty close?
Machiavelli.
Okay, there we go. And he is just immensely excited that we're getting titles like that, and
Great.
that has seemed to come up for a few of these. I mean, you've got that name that a lot of people are attached to, Michael Ritchie. Lynn Ramsey was probably the biggest one that everybody's like, oh my gosh, this partner
Yeah,
label's putting
yeah,
out
yeah.
this title.
Right, right.
This seems just great for a label like this to be able to attract those people that are looking for some of these underseen titles from some of these directors.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, they're all directors that sort of have a little bit of an auteur kind of
Right.
reputation or quality, and yeah, so it's surprising when things like Smile hadn't come out yet, or again, hadn't come out on hadn't been updated since the DVD era, and
Right.
even that DVD from MGM from the really early days of DVD was just like a really poor, outdated, master. I mean, it was. I don't even know if it was anamorphic. So, yeah, it's always surprising because people know those filmmakers and think of them as as important filmmakers. They're not, they're certainly not anonymous. Like, obviously we have some films where where the director is not as well
Right.
known. It doesn't have a following. Nobody's been excited that we put out a Norbert Meisel film, with Walking the Edge,
Right.
um, but no disrespect, but yeah, when you can release a movie by Lynn Ramsey that nobody else has done on Blu-ray, and kind of give it a little, polish it off, it's certainly it's very attractive and it's very exciting, and it gets more people's eyes. You always get more eyes on the label when it's like someone like that, because we're still so new,
Right.
and what we're doing is obviously niche. And I mean, not only what our catalog is, but just the world we're in general is very
Of
niche.
course.
So whenever you can, put something out there that has the potential to like get a whole new audience, or get some new audience, it's always a good thing, because then they look back then they go to you, they're like, oh, how did I not hear about these guys? And they look back
Exactly.
and see what else you've done, and so it hopefully maybe gives a little bit of a little juice to some of the earlier titles too.
We at this channel, everything that we always talk about is physical media, and I am always excited to see when somebody takes design sensibilities from previous sorts of physical media and uses them in exciting ways, like you've done on something like Radio On and the way it
Oh,
looks.
thank
And
you.
on top of that, just the overall packaging for all this is over the top great. I am always singing the praises of the complete package from Fun City, because not only, and you just mentioned the DVD quality of some of these, your restorations have been over the top amazing. I'm loving the way that these look.
Oh, well,
Uh,
thank you. I mean, both of these things, the packaging and the restorations, a lot of that has to, obviously helps to be aligned
right,
with Vinegar Syndrome and OCN, as because not only are they, a distributor of their own stuff and then a distributor of other labels, but they're also a lab, so they're doing, and they've been doing, film to digital restorations now for, I mean, the life of the company
right.
at this point. So, by being a partner label, and we're a pretty closely aligned partner label, and we are one of the only, not the one of the, I don't know how many there are at this point, but I feel like, I feel like we're one of the only partner labels that is really strictly working on films shot on film,
Right.
because a lot of the other partner labels are releasing more contemporary films. So
Correct.
anyway, so we have a sort of a different, workflow. But it makes a lot of sense for us to be aligned with Vinegar Syndrome and OCN, because there's already this machinery in place and really talented, people in place that do a lot, that are so expert and do all this great work, from the quality of the scans to the color grading and so on. And so that's what you're seeing, is you're seeing the, because if I was by myself, it would be, it would have been a
Right.
much bumpier ride, and a much longer learning process, learning curve. So, and then on the design side, obviously those folks really kind of set the bar pretty high with the quality of the packaging that you've seen on the Vinegar Syndrome releases now for years. And obviously, we're here to put movies out, and they're to be watched, not to be cradled and looked
Exactly.
at on your shelf. But they look good, when people think this is going to look good on my shelf, or this is going to feel nice to cradle. That's a good thing. That's a
It's a
good thing
bonus.
too. So it's all part of the package. I mean, because
Right.
like you said, it's physical media. It's these products they're not cheap, and
Right.
there's a lot of competition out there. So I mean, there's a lot of great stuff coming out. So if you can set yourself apart, like especially when it's a movie like Jeremy, and I don't say nobody, but so many people don't know this movie.
Right.
If I had just released it with some vintage artwork on the cover, I don't know if it would have had the same, if it would have caught as many eyes
True.
as it did by us having Jess Rotter do that artwork. And and then of course the slip cover, which again, the quality of the slip cover and having the front and the back artwork and the embossing and the spot gloss and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's
It's
like
so well done.
that was just so much fun to do that one. And she was just an artist that whose work I was familiar with, that I just thought very early on that she would be perfect for that
Right.
movie, and it worked out. And I mean, I'm not an artist, I'm not a designer myself, but I appreciate, and I always have, package design, and the marketing materials for movies, but also for other forms of physical media as well. So like you saw, the Radio On is the cassette tape, which is kind of riffing. It is not kind of, it is
There's
riffing
another
off.
one that's very well
uh,
stylized.
yeah,
Can't
the
really
pillow.
show
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
things, but
Right. But I'm just saying that Radio On was riffing off the Island Records cassette tape.
yeah.
So, we're mixing physical media here, but yeah. It's just it's certainly something that I've always had an appreciation for. So it's fun to be able to utilize it, and bring really cool, really talented artists in, on a and mix it up. Obviously, have different looks for every movie.
And speaking of mixing physical media, Fun City also has put out not just Blu-rays, but cassettes and vinyl, and they have their own website that I'm going to be linking in the description below. So make sure you check that out. They've done a couple pieces of merch. The enamel pin you guys put out is really nice in person. I have that on my wall.
Oh,
It
thank
is
you.
super super nice. Is there plans for more of that coming soon?
More merch?
More
Yes.
everything, more vinyl, more everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's definitely. I think there will be more vinyl, but it's always going to be something which is sort of secondary to
Right.
the movies.
Well, it's a tough time for vinyl right now too.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of it's not. It isn't. You can look. You see behind me the shelf full of vinyl.
Yeah.
I'm obviously someone that's collected records for a long time, and I listen to them too. They don't just sit on the shelf there. But but it's not necessarily what I've worked. I'm my most of my work experience is in film distribution, so
Right.
much more. I have many more contacts in film than in music, and more experience in terms of licensing films and working on films than on music. But I loved doing Cafe Flesh, and I hope there's
Yeah.
more. I hope to have more things like that once in a while, something like that that just fits what we're trying to do. And we'll see. But yeah, it's very expensive to do well,
Right.
to do vinyl good quality, and there's just a lot of there's you know, that's not what we're here to talk about, but obviously there's been a resurgence in, you know, and it just keeps growing in terms of
Right.
people collecting vinyl and, you know, the records. What's happened, of course, is the demand has sort of surpassed the supply in terms of the facilities that can produce the format that, you know, do the work. And so that's the problem, is that for a small label, you kind of get pushed. You know, if there's a big like major label reissue or something like that, you sort of get kicked down the line at the pressing plants because there's just
Right.
not enough of them. Unfortunately, so many places shut down sort of not that long before suddenly people were like, records, yeah, it's great, this great new thing, you know. And then of course all these pressing plants that had been dormant or had not really been used for decades, they were closed. So anyway,
I don't know if you saw it.
another
There was
conversation for another show.
well, not really. I mean, we talk about vinyl on here all the time. There was
Oh, you
a
do?
video,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Jack White a couple months ago put out a video. I don't know if you saw this, that basically said, with all of the resurgence in vinyl and all of the demand that's going on right now, one of these major labels, I'm calling you out to open your own pressing plant in the United States and hire U.S. workers, and haven't heard anything about it. So I really wish something like that could get something kickstarted, and he seems like the voice that could. So time will tell, but yeah, I wish. I mean, some of these, even like the boutique vinyl labels right now in the U.S., they're,
Mhm.
from what I hear, like 12 to 14 months out on getting stuff pressed. So it's
Yeah, I mean,
wild.
I can tell you that our process on Cafe Flesh was, I mean, it predated the pandemic by a few months, and then that
Wow.
really shut things down for
Right.
a while because there was that, you know, basically like in 2020 for a good part of that year, the places were just the mastering place that we were, you know, those places were just like closed for months. And then the
Jeez.
pressing, and then we just got kicked down the line at the pressing plant because of obviously bigger
Right.
releases, you know, that kicked us, you know, that kicked us down the line. So the whole process for us was well over 2 years from when it began to when we had the product out there. So yeah.
That's amazing, and shows just the absolute passion behind the scenes on a label like this. So,
Well,
you,
also once you're there, it wasn't like I could just like, you know, abort. You know,
right.
I was already in it. You know, it was already
Send the
like the
never mind
process.
email.
Process has already started, and you know, money's already been spent, and then it was just sort of like, okay, everything was just sort of like frozen for a while. Yeah.
I get that. Going back to the Blu-rays, as far as I remember, let me take a look. Yeah, I don't think any of the partner labels has put out a box set yet. You guys, I believe, are the only ones, and this Primetime Panic is
Yeah.
it's pretty special. It's fairly unique. Is there, what was the thought process behind the box set? How did you come up with it? And is there anything? Because it seems to me like not a lot of people are talking about that one. That's one that I'd love to get a little more buzz going on.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, I'd love to talk about it. Yeah. That was an example of like looking at a catalog of, you know, of movies, and it was a company that has a very wide range of types of movies, a lot of the stuff that was not for us at all.
Right.
A lot of, you know, 90s direct to video stuff that I'm, even though I was there in the 90s, I didn't know what it was. But there's a lot of stuff that Vinegar Syndrome, for instance, or some of and other labels have licensed from this catalog. But for
Yep.
us, I saw they have these TV movies from, you know, from the sort of golden age of TV movies from the 70s and 80s, and they were, a lot of them had been newly restored, and from the best film elements from the camera negative. And I said, oh well, these are interesting. I couldn't do them by them. I don't think you couldn't. You know, it was an example of, there's certain things where, uh, for it to be a standalone title would be a bit of a bridge too far.
Right.
But if you could say creatively package a few titles, you know, it makes sense to do a box set. So that's why we did that. And I said, you know, so these all came from people. People will say, why don't you do this TV movie and that TV movie? And on and on. And it's like, well, the TV movie has to be owned by someone that we have a relationship, or we
Right.
can have a relationship with. And you can't just mix and match, like, say, like a box set of like movies from all different owners either.
Right.
It's more complicated because you have royalty splits and things like that. So, you can't, and also sometimes you just have stipulations that you can't package a movie in a multi-pack set either. Anyway, we didn't have those stipulations with these movies, and they all came from the same catalog. And I just looked at a bunch of them, and I realized that the three we chose for that box set, I could see at least a little connection between those films.
Those are the titles, by the way.
There are people, so people are actually going to see this. It's not just
absolutely.
Okay, great. I would have cleaned up my background a little bit more.
You're good.
I'll do that. Anyway, so those three movies are all produced by the same producers, and they were all restored recently. So they just sort of fit together, and then we just had to try to come up with an alliterative, catchy title. And of course, some people, these are not horror movies. They're not. Panic is really kind of like overselling it and whatnot. And I thought, well, no, they all are sort of scare films. They all have aspects to those films which are sort of ripped from the headlines, and which have the idea. They were all sort of pitched at parents. They were all sort of pitched at concerned parents. Like, oh, these are. And that's a lot of TV movies, they're sort of heightened reality. Their scenarios are, like I said, ripped from the headlines a lot. They're sort of based on stuff that people were talking about or scared about at the time, or concerned about. And that's why people get it. And so, like, when people criticize Dreams Don't Die, it's like as being like, corny, like, having this like moral, sort of moralizing element to it. It's like, well, that's how it got made. That's why it got made. That was the reality of TV movies. That was sort of what the market dictated. So it's kind of cool that the other cool stuff in that movie, the graffiti and the grungy New York, was able to slip in there. Okay. But that was sort of my hesitancy on the first time I was looking at some of these movies was, well, because I had seen Dreams Don't Die when I was a kid, like on late night TV, because it did get rerun a lot throughout the 80s and 90s. And I was like drawn to it because I was like, oh, it's like it had the graffiti, and it kind of reminded me a little of the Warriors. And it was New York of that same time period, with the, showing the subways with the graffiti and everything. And, it's pre-gentrified outer borough New York. But yeah, I looked at it again, and I thought, I don't know. It might be a little too, like I said, the sort of graffiti is bad, don't do it. Part of it, I wasn't sure if I was, totally with it. But then I said, that's just how this stuff happened at the time. So you kind of have to, that's why we have the extra features. That's why we try to have historian commentaries or essays and booklets and things like that, which is to historicize the piece, to contextualize it, because context is everything. I really feel like, especially with all the films we have, there's things that are quote unquote problematic now. Parts of these movies that were because of when they were made, they were just made in a different time.
Absolutely.
And very often when you see things streaming, there's no context. So people, might stumble upon something like Dreams Don't Die. And if they have no idea that, if they're younger and they just completely if they weren't alive or sentient during the time when when a TV movie like that was made, they're not going to know, like, hey, yeah, I know it's it's outdated. It has things that are easy to criticize from a 2022 point of view. you know, whether it's the fact that, yeah, the main character is the main character, the main protagonist, graffiti writer, is, you know, this you know, it's Ike Eisenman, who's like lily white Disney kid. And yes, it's easy to critique that, you know, if it was made now, and we have much more diversity in casting, and things are much more inclusionary, and we've evolved in that way, so that it probably would not be, you know, lily white,
Right.
you know, apple cheeked Ike Eisenman. I think he's good. He's good in the movie. But yeah, I mean, there's things about it that are authentic, and then there's things about it which are dictated by the market at the time, and also just like what, you know, what people at the, you know, at the time, what would be accepted and what wouldn't be. And you know, you just, so anyway, my point is, if you have context, then you can watch something and understand, like,
Right.
watch it at, you know, you sort of have, you can then have at least a little more of an idea of what it was like to see it when it came out and when it was new. And that's the case, like I said, we have a lot of films which have things in them which nowadays you can't do. You know, they show things, or they portray things, or have plot elements or whatever that are, or you know, or they have or some of the filmmakers that are, you know, not would be canceled now, or are canceled,
Right.
you know. And so but I do, you know, I do subscribe to, for the most part, try to separate the art from the artist,
I agree.
and I felt, again, like, so for something like Bilitis, you know, I felt it was important to have historian commentary, and really kind of not shy away from any of the controversy about
Yep.
the film or the filmmaker. And you know, kind of just, I think as long as I mean, I think as long as you address those things, I mean, that's the idea, that's the opportunity that we have here, is to not only present the film, but you know, the film itself, but the, you know, just the everything that was happening, or a lot of what was happening around it. That's what
Right.
the form. That's the nice thing about physical media, is having that space to have the packaging, to have a booklet like you, that you know, you mentioned before, that you enjoy. We'll keep doing those, and then having the commentary, and having, if we can, you know, have, you know, relevant, valuable video features as well, interviews and such.
That's one thing we've dived into on this channel quite a lot, is the archival aspect. And I've got a little old letterboard sign on my wall that says the disconnected museum and library, because that's why I try to do a lot of this. I curate it for myself, and then on top of that, I want to be able to look back at this in 30 years and step back into a period of time and learn something new. And I felt that way at most in a library. And when you are seeing some of these, yes, some of them might be problematic or not PC, or however you want to attack a lot of the imagery in some of these things. But in all reality, if we don't archive it and you do something like censor it or ban it, what opportunity is there to learn from? What opportunity is there to actually have a piece of history and grow as a person and as a society? So completely agreed with you there.
Yeah, and also I feel like um, it's just more, it gives you something more to talk about, you
Right.
know. But yeah, I think it's important what you said, you know, as far as learning from these things, and that's the thing, is that there's many ways that we're more evolved, but then there's many ways in which I think the cost of that in some ways has been nuance. There's
Yep.
been there's sort of been like middle ground, and um, there's been gray area that sort of has been shaved off or lost, you know, in sort of the move, or you know, the move towards a more evolved uh,
Right.
collective mind space. And I mean, and in many ways, in many ways, that's been achieved. But yeah, I feel like sometimes certain things, I mean, I see qualifying things on, like, when people are reviewing some of our titles like from the 70s, like something like Smile, and I'll see like a review on Letterboxd, and maybe, who knows? Well, I'm citing some of these reviews by memory, and then I'm like, oh, some of these people might actually be like disconnected
You're
viewers or
good.
subscribers, who knows? But anyway, I read this review on Smile, and it's like a positive review, and then it was like at the bottom, trigger alert, 17-year-old Melanie Griffith, and I don't know, and I just feel like that's the kind of thing where I'm like what are you signifying there? Like,
Right.
you're sort of like, it's like I don't know. It feels to me sometimes in a way like you're putting yourself above the film
Absolutely.
in a way, like, you're more evolved than the people that made it and the film itself.
Yep.
And it's very easy to do when you're nearly 50 years in the future from when that movie was made.
It's a very different world, and I mean, yes, trigger
Yeah.
alerts are probably not necessary for a lot of these movies, but yeah, it does take a lot of nuance. But thanks, social media, for taking a lot of that gray out.
Yeah,
uh,
well, yeah, it's definitely, it does encourage people to, obviously in one way or another tell you that they're right,
right.
uh, or they know better. So
Yep, we've lost a lot of our take a moment to think before we speak as a society, unfortunately. Um, On that note, I wanted to thank you for your time. I didn't know that I'd give you about an hour, and it's about to be 9 o'clock here. So thank you for everything. I appreciate the time today. It has been absolutely a joy. I sincerely hope people check out Fun City Editions, and not only for what's coming up in the sale at the end of the month, but for the foreseeable future, because there's no signs of slowing, and every single release has been a winner, in my opinion.
thanks so much, Ryan, for saying that, and for talking about us on the show, as long as you have, championing us, and and I'm happy to have been able to spend some time with you here.
Thank you, sir.